The board is in a closed session. People without clearance wait downstairs.
Do they?
Once this is signed, no one can reverse it.
She's gone. This company belongs to us now.
6 minutes was all I needed.
This is a closed meeting. Who let you in?
That chair, who told you that you could sit in it?
I'm the CEO. Hey, remove her. She's trespassing. Make sure she never gets back inside.
What should I tell her? Article 9 has been verified.
Diane Carter now holds full operation. You can't do this.
Sale was only the beginning. They tried to erase everything.
Keep watching the story and follow Mr. Marcus Stories for more powerful moments.
Weeks ago, Diane Carter had not walked through the doors of Halden Tower in 5 years, and she almost didn't recognize the building when she saw it. Weeks ago, the glass facade caught the Charlotte morning sun at 8:40 a.m., throwing sharp white light across the sidewalk where she stood in a plain gray coat, flat shoes, and no jewelry except a thin silver watch that had belonged to her mother. Weeks ago, commuters moved past her in both directions, phones in hand, coffee cups sweating in the September heat. Weeks ago, nobody looked twice at the 58-year-old black woman standing still on the corner of Trade Street and 5th. Weeks ago, she had built this building, or rather, she and Walter Briggs had built the company that built this building, back when Halden Energy Group was 2 folding tables and a leaking coffee maker in a rented unit off Freedom Drive. Weeks ago, Walter was the one who insisted her name go on the founding papers first, even though investors kept addressing every question to him. Weeks ago, "You're the one who understands the technology, Diane," he used to say in that flat Nebraska accent that never once wavered when he corrected people. Weeks ago, "I just signed the checks." Walter died of pancreatic cancer 4 years ago, and in his final month he made her promise something she had never quite forgiven herself for agreeing to: step back, let the leadership team he'd trained run things, and go live a life outside the company for once. Weeks ago, she kept that promise. She funded scholarships. She built 2 schools in rural Mississippi. Weeks ago, she grieved quietly in a house on the coast of Georgia that Walter never got to see finished. Weeks ago, then 19 days ago, an email arrived in her personal inbox with no note attached to it, only a subject line that read, "They think you're gone for good." Weeks ago, inside were internal financial documents that did not match the public filings, and a memo outlining a proposed sale of Halden Energy Group's entire battery patent portfolio to Corvex Petroleum, one of the largest fossil fuel companies in the country, for $340 million less than an independent appraisal had valued it. Weeks ago, the email ended with a single sentence: "Someone needs to remind them whose name is on the wall." Weeks ago, Diane had spent 11 days quietly verifying every page, every signature checked out. Weeks ago, every dollar amount matched bank records she still had access to as majority shareholder. Weeks ago, CEO Preston Cole and COO Marcus Doyle, the 2 men Walter had personally groomed to lead the company, were 72 hours from finalizing a deal that would gut clean energy mission Halden was built on and pocket a combined $61 million in private equity stakes from Corvex in the process. Weeks ago, she did not call ahead, she did not send word. Weeks ago, she simply flew from Savannah to Charlotte on a Tuesday morning and walked toward the revolving doors of the tower that still bore her company's name, though not, she would soon discover, her face. Weeks ago, the lobby had changed. Gone were the warm oak panels she picked out herself in 2011, replaced by cold white marble and a 60-foot mural of Preston Cole shaking hands with a senator. Weeks ago, there was no photo of Walter, there was no photo of her. Weeks ago, she approached the front desk, where a young receptionist named Ashley Turner sat behind a wall of frosted glass, sipping an oat milk latte and scrolling through something on her phone. Weeks ago, "Can I help you?" Ashley said, not quite a question, her eyes flicking up and down Diane's coat, her shoes, the absence of a visible badge or briefcase that screamed importance. Weeks ago, "I'm here for the 10 o'clock board session," Diane said. Weeks ago, "Do you have an appointment logged in the system?" Weeks ago, "No." Ashley's mouth curved into the practiced, distant smile of someone trained to be polite while saying no. Weeks ago, "I'm sorry, the executive floor requires prior clearance. I can leave a message with someone's assistant if you'd like." Weeks ago. Before Diane could answer, a woman in a sharp navy blazer stepped off the elevator, tablet pressed to her chest, heels clicking against the marble with the confidence of someone who had never once been made to wait in a lobby. Weeks ago. Her name tag read Sarah's executive assistant to... Weeks ago. "Cole, is there a problem?" Sarah asked Ashley, not Diane. Weeks ago. This woman says she has a meeting, but there's nothing on the calendar. Weeks ago, Sarah turned to Diane the way people turn toward something slightly inconvenient. Weeks ago, there was no flicker of recognition in her eyes, none at all, because Sarah had joined the company 2 years ago, long after Diane's had faded out of the daily conversation of Halden Energy Group. Weeks ago, to Sarah, Diane was simply a middle-aged black woman in a plain coat who had wandered into the wrong lobby. Weeks ago, ma'am, the board is in a closed session this morning. Weeks ago, it can't be interrupted. If you leave your contact information, I can have someone follow up. Weeks ago. I'll wait, Diane said. Sarah hesitated, then gestured toward a row of chairs along the corridor that led to the executive wing, chairs upholstered in the same cold gray as everything else in the building now. Weeks ago. You're welcome to sit there, but I should tell you, this could take a while. Weeks ago. Diane sat was hard against her back. Weeks ago. From where she sat, she could see through the glass wall of the main boardroom, where 11 men in dark suits sat around a long table, and at the head of it, Preston Cole gestured toward a screen with the Corvex Petroleum logo glowing behind him. Weeks ago, she checked her watch. 1 minute. Employees moved past her carrying coffee and folders, glancing at her only long enough to register that she did not belong, then looking away the way people look away from something they've already decided isn't worth their attention. Weeks ago. 2 minutes. Through the glass, Marcus Doyle laughed at something and clapped Preston Cole on the shoulder. 2 men entirely comfortable in a room they believed they had already won. Weeks ago. 3 minutes. A memory surfaced, uninvited. 15 years earlier, on this same block, in a much smaller building, she and Walter had sat on the floor of their first real office because they'd sold the folding chairs to make a forced $217. Weeks ago, 83 payroll shortfall. There had been a cold pizza box between them and absolutely no guarantee that any of it would work. Weeks ago. This company is going to belong to whoever creates the value. Walter had told her that night, his eyes bright with a kind of stubborn faith. Weeks ago. Not to whoever looks the part. And if people forget that, she'd asked him. Weeks ago, he'd smiled, then you remind them that's the job. Weeks ago. 4 minutes. She wondered what Walter would say if he could see his name partner sitting in a hallway, invisible to companies and technology was signed away to an oil conglomerate. Weeks ago. 5 minutes. Sarah Nolan walked past again, glanced at Diane with something that might have been a flicker of pity, the kind reserved for people who don't understand they're wasting their own time. Weeks ago. 6 minutes. Anne stood up. There were 2 roads in front of her. Weeks ago. She could leave, call her attorneys, and spend the next 8 months fighting this in courtrooms while Cole and Doyle finished the deal and walked away rich. Weeks ago. Or she could walk through that glass door right now and remind every person in that room exactly whose name still legally controlled 53% of the company. Weeks ago. She had spent her whole life being underestimated. As a teenage girl in a Charlotte public school where a guidance counselor once told her engineering wasn't realistic. As a young engineer in rooms where investors addressed every technical question to Walter. As a founder whose own name got quietly removed from a lobby mural 3 years after she stepped back. Weeks ago, she had learned, slowly and at great cost, to use that underestimation as a weapon. Weeks ago, let them believe you're small, let them believe you don't matter. Weeks ago, and when they aren't looking anymore, take back everything they assumed was theirs. Weeks ago, she straightened her coat and walked toward the boardroom door. Weeks ago, the door swung open and every head in the room turned at once. Weeks ago, Preston Cole froze mid-sentence, his hands still raised toward the Corvex logo glowing on the screen behind him. Weeks ago, 11 pairs of eyes fixed on the woman standing in the doorway, plain coat, no badge, no reason, as far as any of them knew, to be standing there at all. Weeks ago, Marcus Doyle spoke first, his voice carrying the sharp edge of a man unused to interruption. Weeks ago, this is a closed session, who let you up here? Weeks ago. Diane didn't answer. She stepped inside and let the door click shut behind her. Weeks ago, her eyes moved slowly across the table, mostly new hires, Cole's people, faces she didn't recognize. Weeks ago. But at the far end, pushed almost to the margin of the table the way a man gets pushed when he's stopped being useful to power, sat someone she remembered clearly. Thomas Reed, general counsel, who had worked with her and Walter since the very beginning. Weeks ago, his face had gone the color of chalk, and his hands gripped the edge of the table like a man bracing for impact. Weeks ago, He knows exactly who I am, thought. He said nothing. Weeks ago. He couldn't, not yet. Preston Cole rose from his chair, buttoning his jacket with the smooth, unhurried calm of a man who had never once doubted that he controlled every room he entered. Weeks ago. Ma'am, I don't know how you got past security, but you need to leave right now, before this becomes a legal matter. Weeks ago. I'll leave when I'm ready, Diane said. The words landed flat and hard. Weeks ago, Doyle's jaw tightened. Two younger executives exchanged a glance, because this was not how anyone spoke to Preston Cole inside this building, not anymore. Weeks ago, Sarah appeared breathless in the doorway. I'm so sorry. Weeks ago, Cole, she was in the hallway. I told her I'll call security right now. Weeks ago, do that, Doyle said, without even looking at her. Weeks ago, but Diane was already moving, walking past the row of leather chairs, past the crystal water glasses nobody had touched, toward the head of the table, where Cole still stood, with his hand resting on the back of a chair that had once belonged to Walter Briggs, and before that, to her. Weeks ago. That chair, Diane said, quiet even. Who told you that you could sit in it? Weeks ago. Cole's composure cracked for one visible second before he recovered. Weeks ago. I'm the CEO of this company. I sit wherever I choose. Weeks ago. You're the CEO because I allowed you to be. Weeks ago. Diane pulled the chair out and sat down. According to the founding charter I wrote in my own handwriting, that seat still belongs to me. Weeks ago. The room went completely silent. 11 men stared at a black woman in a plain gray coat, sitting in the chairman's seat as though she owned it because she did. Weeks ago. Cole's face reddened. I don't know who you think you are. Weeks ago. My name is Diane Carter, she said, cutting him off without raising her voice. Weeks ago. I am the co-founder of Halden Energy Group. I own 53% of this company, and I have just spent 6 minutes sitting in a hallway of a building that carries my company's name, being treated like I don't belong here. Weeks ago, she looked around the table, meeting every set of eyes she could. Weeks ago. So let me ask you gentlemen something. Who exactly doesn't belong in this room? Weeks ago. 2 security guards had already been summoned by the time Diane finished speaking, and they arrived at the boardroom door at 10:53 a.m., exactly 6 minutes after she'd sat down. Weeks ago. Doyle pointed at her without hesitation. Remove her, she's trespassing. Weeks ago. The guards hesitated, glancing between the calm woman in the chairman's seat and the 2 red-faced executives standing over her, and for a moment neither of them moved. Weeks ago. Then Cole's voice cracked like a whip. Now, what happened next was the moment that would end up on every business news channel in the country by that evening. Not because Diane resisted, but because she didn't. Weeks ago. She stood, smoothed her coat, and allowed the guards to walk her toward the elevator, her heels clicking evenly against the marble, her face utterly still. Weeks ago. Behind her, she heard Cole exhale, believing for exactly 90 more seconds that he had won. Weeks ago. In the lobby in front of Ashley Turner and a dozen watching employees, Diane reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a single business card. Weeks ago. It was old, slightly worn at the corners, cream-colored with raised black lettering. Diane Carter, founder and chairwoman, Halden Energy Group. Weeks ago. She set it face up on the reception desk. Call Margaret Holt in the corporate secretary's office, she said to Ashley. Weeks ago. Tell her Diane Carter is invoking Article 9, authorization code Briggs 0842. Weeks ago. Tell her it's urgent. Ashley stared at the card, then at Diane, then back at the card. Her expression slid from confusion into something closer to dread. Weeks ago, she dialed with shaking hands. The call lasted exactly 41 seconds. Weeks ago. She's on her way down, Ashley said quietly, setting the phone back in its cradle. Weeks ago. Margaret Holt arrived from the 14th floor 11 minutes later, out of breath, phone already pressed to her ear, confirming the authorization code with outside counsel. Weeks ago. By 11:20 a.m., an emergency notice had gone out to every department head in Halden Tower, pursuant to Article 9 of the founding charter, a clause written into the company's very first legal documents, granting the majority shareholder emergency operational authority in cases of fiduciary breach. Diane Carter had assumed direct control of the company, effective immediately. Weeks ago. Preston Cole and Marcus Doyle were still in the boardroom, still congratulating themselves when security escorted them out instead at 11:47 a.m., exactly 1 hour after they'd had Diane removed from the same room. Weeks ago. The reveal did not stop with the phone call. Over the following 72 hours, 3 former Halden employees came forward voluntarily to Margaret Holt's office, once word spread that Diane Carter had returned. Weeks ago. The first was James Ferris, a battery engineer who had been quietly demoted 18 months earlier after raising concerns that Cole was diverting R&D funding away from the exact clean energy patents now slated for sale to Corvex. Weeks ago. The second was Renee Osei, no. Diane corrected internally, catching the instinct. The second was Lauren Ackley, a mid-level compliance officer who had been forced to sign off on financial reports she personally believed were misleading, under direct pressure from Doyle, or lose her position entirely. Weeks ago. The third was a facilities supervisor named Curtis Whitfield, a man in his 60s who had worked in the original Freedom Drive office, back when Diane and Walter were still selling folding chairs to make payroll, and who had watched, department by department, as Cole quietly pushed out nearly every longtime employee who remembered what the company used to stand for. Weeks ago. Each of them sat across from Diane in what had once been Walter's office, and each of them told a version of the same story. A culture that had rewarded loyalty to 2 men over loyalty to the mission, and punished anyone who asked too many questions. Weeks ago. I didn't think anyone was ever coming back to check, Curtis told her, his voice rough. Weeks ago. I figured Walter's whole idea just died with him. Weeks ago. It almost did. It's not going to now. Weeks ago. The legal and financial reckoning moved fast once it started. Weeks ago. Within 9 days, an internal audit confirmed that Cole and Doyle had structured the Corvex sale to route $61 million in private stakes to shell entities registered under their spouses' names, a detail that transformed the matter from a breach of fiduciary duty into active securities fraud. Weeks ago, the Securities and Exchange Commission opened a formal inquiry on day 11. Weeks ago, Halden's outside counsel filed civil claims for the recovery of damages on day 14. Weeks ago, Corvex Petroleum, facing its own regulatory exposure, publicly withdrew from the deal within the month, though not before its CEO tried twice to reach Diane directly to renegotiate. Weeks ago, she did not return either call. Preston Cole gave one interview to a regional business paper before his attorneys advised him to stop talking. Weeks ago. In it, he insisted the deal had been in the company's best long-term financial interest, and that Diane's intervention was an emotional overreaction from someone disconnected from modern operations. Weeks ago, he never once said he was wrong. Weeks ago. Marcus Doyle said nothing publicly at all, though court filings later showed he'd attempted. The same afternoon, he was escorted out to authorize a remote wipe of the entire battery patent research archive, a fail-safe, prosecutors argued, meant to ensure that if the sale collapsed, no one else could use the technology either. Weeks ago, IT staff caught the deletion order 18 minutes after it was issued and locked the system before a single file was lost. Weeks ago, Diane appointed Thomas Reed as interim CEO the following week, the same general counsel who had sent her the anonymous email 19 days earlier, and who had spent 5 years watching his own company drift away from what it was supposed to be. Too afraid to speak up until he finally decided fear wasn't a good enough reason anymore. Weeks ago, you risked your job sending me that email, Diane told him, the day she offered him the position. Weeks ago, I risked more than that, Thomas said, but you came. Weeks ago, that's the part I didn't expect. The stock dropped 9% the morning the story broke, then climbed back within 3 weeks as the market absorbed what the company had actually been protected from. Weeks ago, analysts who had once called Diane's intervention reckless were, by the second month, writing about it as one of the cleanest corporate accountability actions of the decade. Weeks ago, inside Halden Tower, the change was slower and quieter and in some ways harder to measure than a stock chart. Weeks ago, Diane spent her first month back meeting personally with every department, not to announce sweeping policy changes, but to listen. Weeks ago, she asked engineers what had been lost under Cole's leadership. Weeks ago, she asked young hires whether they still believed in the mission they'd been recruited for. Weeks ago, she asked Sarah Nolan, the executive assistant who hadn't recognized her that first morning, to stay on. Not because Sarah had done nothing wrong, but because Diane recognized something in the way Sarah's face had changed once she understood what she'd done. Weeks ago, I looked at you and decided you didn't matter enough to ask your name, Sarah admitted to her 3 weeks later in the same lobby where it had all started. Weeks ago, That's the part I can't stop thinking about. You weren't wrong because you didn't recognize me, Diane told her. Weeks ago, you were wrong because you decided before you knew anything that I wasn't worth recognizing. Weeks ago, that's the thing to fix. Not for my sake, for the next person who walks through that door who doesn't look like what you're expecting. Weeks ago. Sarah nodded slowly. I understand. Good, because I'm going to need people who are willing to see differently. Weeks ago. Are you honest, ma'am? I am. Weeks ago. 6 weeks after the boardroom confrontation, Halden Energy Group formally reaffirmed its founding mission at a company-wide meeting held in the atrium of its own tower, broadcast to satellite offices across 4 states. Weeks ago, Diane stood at a small podium, no notes, wearing the same plain gray coat she'd worn the day she walked back in. Weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, she told the room. I walked into this building for the first time in 5 years and no one recognized me. Weeks ago, I sat in a hallway for 6 minutes while 2 men prepared to sign away everything this company was built to stand for. Weeks ago, 6 minutes isn't very long, but it was long enough for me to understand exactly how far we had drifted from why we started. Weeks ago. She paused, letting the silence hold the way Walter used to, deliberately, without rushing to fill it. Weeks ago. This company was founded by a white man from Nebraska and a black woman from Charlotte, and we had almost nothing in common except one belief, that what you build matters more than what you look like when you walk through a door. Weeks ago. Walter Briggs is gone, but that belief doesn't get buried with him. Weeks ago. This company does not belong to a CEO or a board or a shareholder. Weeks ago. It belongs to the people who show up and create something real every single day, regardless of what assumptions get made about them in a lobby. Weeks ago, the applause did not erupt immediately. It built slowly the way real recognition does until it filled the entire atrium. Weeks ago. 2 months later, a new photograph replaced the 60-foot mural of Preston Cole in the lobby of Halden Tower. Weeks ago. It showed 2 people standing outside a small rented office on Freedom Drive 15 years earlier, both of them younger, both of them smiling in front of a hand-painted sign, with no way of knowing whether any of it would work. Weeks ago, underneath, a simple engraved line read, founded by Diane Carter and Walter Briggs, 2010. Weeks ago, Diane was crossing the lobby on a Tuesday afternoon when a young black woman, maybe 23 years old, wearing a brand new employee badge, stopped in front of the photograph and studied it for a long moment before turning around. Weeks ago. You're Diane Carter, she said. It wasn't a question. I am. Weeks ago. I read about what happened here. It's part of why I applied. Weeks ago. Diane looked at her for a moment. This stranger who represented every version of a future Diane would never personally get to see unfold. Weeks ago. Then remember this, she said. When you're the one sitting in a leadership chair someday, and someone walks through that door who doesn't look like what you expected, you ask their name. Weeks ago, you treat them like they matter, because they do. Weeks ago. The young woman nodded. Diane walked toward the elevator, leaving her standing there with the photograph of 2 founders who had started with nothing but a folding table and a stubborn belief that value shouldn't have a face attached to it. Weeks ago, 6 minutes in a hallway had ended one version of a company. Weeks ago. What came after was the one that finally deserved the name on the building. Weeks ago. Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and educational purposes only. Weeks ago. All characters, names, businesses, and events depicted are entirely fictional and do not represent any real person, living or dead, or any actual establishment. Weeks ago. Any resemblance to real persons, organizations, or events is purely coincidental. Weeks ago. This content is intended to explore themes of human dignity, workplace ethics, and social justice through narrative storytelling. Weeks ago. It does not make factual claims about any individual, company, or institution.